17.9 million tons. That is how much graphite Ukraine is sitting on. 17.9 million tons of the material that is now plunging Russia's military back into the Stone Age. And Russia cannot stop it, even when its air defenses are working. Here is what happened. Ukraine quietly modified its battlefield drones to carry graphite warheads instead of conventional explosives. When those drones fly into occupied Donetsk, day or night, but especially at night, they detonate in midair and release a cloud of microscopic conductive filaments that drift down onto Russia's power infrastructure like invisible snow. Radars go dark, air defense systems trip offline, command centers lose power, and Russia cannot do anything about it because even when its guns shoot Ukraine's drones out of the sky, the graphite still falls. In this video, we will look at exactly how Ukraine's graphite bombs work and why Russia's air defenses make the problem worse, not better. We will trace the history of graphite weapons, from the Gulf War to Belgrade to Tehran, and show why Ukraine's version of this technology is something genuinely new. And we will zoom out to the strategic picture, what Ukraine is really trying to accomplish with these weapons, why preserving Russian-occupied infrastructure is a form of defiance, and what happens if Ukraine loads graphite into its longest-range drones and sends them all the way to Moscow. But first, let's look at the battlefield in Donetsk and the specific problem Ukraine needed to solve. Russia's war in Ukraine runs on electricity. That is not a metaphor. Every radar dish, every air defense battery, every command center, every communications relay station, every forward operating base, all of it requires a constant supply of power. When Russia swept into the occupied territories of Donetsk, one of its first priorities was seizing Ukraine's power infrastructure. The power stations, the substations, the grid nodes that Ukraine built over decades. Russia took them over and put them to work, fueling its own military machine. Electricity became a weapon in Russia's hands. Think about what that means in practice. Russia's forces are dug in across a front that stretches for hundreds of kilometers. They are fighting against Ukraine's Donetsk fortress belt, a chain of heavily fortified cities that has already cost Russia catastrophically. In March alone, Russia lost over 35,000 soldiers in that region, 35,000 men in a single month, grinding themselves against defenses that refuse to break. Russia keeps sending soldiers forward because it has no other strategy. Attrition, mass, the economics of exhaustion, the idea that if you throw enough bodies and shells at a problem, eventually the problem collapses. It has not collapsed. Ukraine holds. But Russia's military machine in that region needs power to function. Radars need power to see Ukraine's incoming drones and missiles. Air defense launchers need power to track, lock, and fire. Command and control centers, the nerve centers where Russia plans its assaults, coordinates its units, issues its orders, need power to operate. The communications infrastructure that keeps Russia's dispersed forces from descending into chaos needs power. Without electricity, Russia's modern military reverts to something older, slower, more vulnerable. Ukraine understood this long before graphite entered the picture. The problem was always delivery. How do you cut Russia's power in occupied Donetsk without destroying the infrastructure you will need to rebuild when you take the territory back? Conventional explosives are precise but permanent. A Ukrainian drone strike on a Russian-occupied power station gets the job done today, but it leaves rubble where functioning equipment used to be. Ukraine tried this approach anyway. As recently as November of last year, Ukrainian drones were crashing into power plants in Donetsk, causing significant structural damage. It worked, but it was expensive, and it was short-sighted. Here is where it gets serious. Ukraine needed a weapon that could cut the power without leaving craters. Something that could take Russia's electrical infrastructure offline, force Russia to scramble to repair it, and leave the underlying equipment standing and recoverable. Something Russia could not simply intercept, because even a partial intercept would still accomplish the mission, and it needed to be deliverable at scale, using the same drone platforms Ukraine was already deploying across the front. The answer was graphite, and Ukraine found it. Graphite is not an exotic material. It is the same substance in the tip of a pencil, scaled down to microscopic filaments and weaponized. Inside Ukraine's modified drone warheads are thousands upon thousands of tiny graphite strands, fibers so thin they are almost invisible individually, light enough to drift through the air like dust after they are released. When those fibers descend onto electrical equipment, the physics take over. Graphite is conductive, highly conductive. When a fine graphite filament lands across 2 points of different electrical potential, across a circuit board, across a transformer terminal, across a radar antenna array, it creates a short circuit. One fiber is not enough, but thousands of them, all falling simultaneously onto the same installation, create something more dangerous. The fibers begin to vaporize as electrical current flows through them. That vaporization creates ionized channels, pathways of superheated air and plasma, through which even more current begins to flow. A cascade begins, fail-safes trip, systems shut themselves down to prevent catastrophic damage. And within seconds, without any explosion, without any fire, without a single missile striking the ground, Russia's power goes out. That is the mechanism. Now here is the genius in how Ukraine is deploying it. Ukraine is not using aircraft to drop these weapons. It cannot afford to. Its fighter jets and bombers are finite, precious, and extremely difficult to replace. Sending them into occupied Donetsk on graphite bomb runs would be an unnecessary risk of irreplaceable assets. Instead, Ukraine has done something more elegant. It has loaded graphite warheads into the same mid-range drone models, almost certainly the FP-1 and FP-2, that it is already using to deliver conventional explosive strikes across the front. From the outside, these drones are indistinguishable from their explosive counterparts. Russia's radar systems cannot tell, when they pick up an incoming drone swarm, which drones are carrying explosives and which are carrying graphite. That uncertainty alone has strategic value, but the real brilliance is what happens when Russia's air defenses engage. Normally, shooting down a Ukrainian drone is a win for Russia. The threat is neutralized. The attack fails, the system worked. With graphite drones, shooting the drone down is still a loss. The warhead detonates in midair, which is what it was designed to do, and the graphite filaments disperse across a wide area below. Russia's air defense batteries are positioned, by definition, near the things Russia considers most important: power stations, command centers, radar installations. So when Russia shoots down a graphite drone near one of those facilities, the filaments rain down right on top of the very equipment Russia was trying to protect. The defense mechanism becomes the delivery mechanism. Russia has built a trap for itself. And then Ukraine made its move. The first serious reports began surfacing in early April. Defense Express, a Ukrainian defense publication with strong sourcing inside the military, reported that Russian forces in occupied Donetsk were claiming Ukraine had begun deploying graphite bombs during nighttime raids. Russian soldiers in the field were sharing footage on social media. In one widely circulated clip, a Russian air defense system engages an incoming Ukrainian drone swarm and scores multiple hits. The operators are pleased. Then the camera captures the debris from the downed drones, and someone notices graphite filaments, tiny, almost invisible threads coating the ground around the wreckage. Even in destruction, the weapon had done its work. Official Russian sources confirmed the situation. TASS, Russia's state news agency, reported on April 6 that Ukraine had deployed graphite bombs against power facilities in occupied Donetsk the day before. The bombs detonated in midair. Fine graphite threads dispersed over the target area. Russia claimed its air defenses shot down 6 Ukrainian drones and intercepted 10 more. 3 got through. 3 drones carrying graphite warheads reached their targets and dropped their payloads on power facilities. Even by Russia's own numbers, which should be taken with considerable skepticism, Ukraine's new weapon was penetrating the defense. Think about what 3 drones dropping graphite can accomplish. 3 drones worth of filaments drifting down onto a power station in occupied Donetsk. The cascade effect begins. The facility trips offline. Russia's soldiers in the surrounding area lose the electrical supply their radars, communications, and command equipment depend on. In the darkness and confusion, Russia's military temporarily reverts to slower, more primitive methods of coordination. Meanwhile, Ukraine's conventional drone strikes keep coming. To understand why Ukraine's version works as well as it does, we need to go back, all the way to the Persian Gulf in 1991. During the Gulf War, the United States Navy deployed a specialized warhead via its Tomahawk cruise missiles. The concept was similar, though the delivery mechanism was different. Instead of microscopic filaments, the early American version used reels of carbon fiber that unwound and draped across Iraq's electrical infrastructure, creating short circuits at scale. It worked. Iraq's power grid sustained significant damage. Almost a decade later, NATO returned to the concept during its air campaign against Yugoslavia. Over Belgrade, today the capital of Serbia, NATO aircraft began dropping what the international media called soft bombs. The name was deliberate and accurate. These weapons were not designed to destroy. They were designed to disable. Graphite filaments, dispersed from altitude, drifting down onto the electrical infrastructure of a modern European capital. The result was immediate. In a single operation, NATO managed to cut power to 70% of Serbia. 70%. Radar installations went dark. Military communications networks collapsed. Air defense systems, the same air defense systems that had just weeks earlier shot down a United States Air Force F-117 Nighthawk, a stealth aircraft that NATO had assumed was invulnerable, tripped offline. The Nighthawk was recovered, its pilot captured, and NATO was forced to reckon with the fact that Yugoslavia's air defenses were more capable than anticipated. Soft bombs provided the answer. With the air defenses down, NATO's aircraft operated with far greater freedom. Ukraine is now attempting to replicate that effect over occupied Donetsk. There is a more recent precedent, too. Around the same time, Ukraine's graphite operations in Donetsk began attracting attention. Reports emerged from the Middle East suggesting that Israel had been using similar weapons against power plants in Tehran. Like Ukraine's operations, none of this was officially confirmed. Like Ukraine's operations, the evidence was circumstantial but compelling. Power facilities going offline, no explosion, no obvious physical damage. The graphite speaks for itself. Ukraine noticed. Ukraine learned. So why does this matter beyond the tactical disruption it causes? Here is where Ukraine's strategy reveals its deeper logic. Ukraine is not simply trying to cut Russia's power in the short term. Ukraine is fighting a war it plans to win, and it is already thinking about what comes after. The power stations in occupied Donetsk are Ukrainian. Ukraine built them. Ukraine operated them for decades before Russia's invasion. When Ukraine eventually pushes Russia out, and Ukraine's leadership is unambiguous about this being the goal, not a hope but a plan, those power stations will need to function again. Ukrainian cities will need power. Ukrainian hospitals, schools, and factories will need electricity to restart. Conventional explosives would leave rubble. Graphite leaves the equipment standing. Russia has to carry out repairs. Tripped systems need time to come back online. Small components burned out by cascading current need to be replaced. And all of that takes time and resources that Russia must divert from its military operations. But the fundamental infrastructure survives. Ukraine is not bombing its own future. It is borrowing time against it. That is strategic intelligence of a very specific kind. Ukraine is inflicting military costs on Russia today, while preserving economic assets for Ukraine tomorrow. It is a form of warfare that is looking past the current battle, past the current phase of the conflict, all the way to the reconstruction that comes after victory. There is a symbolic dimension, too. Putin has spent years arguing that Ukraine is not a real country, that it has no legitimate independent existence, that its people, its culture, its infrastructure are Russian by right. For Ukraine to use weapons that preserve Ukrainian-built infrastructure, that refuse to allow Russia to claim that Ukraine destroyed what Russia now holds, is a quiet, devastating rebuttal. It tells Putin that Ukraine is not just fighting for survival. Ukraine is governing, planning, building a future that explicitly excludes Russian occupation. But stay with us, because it gets more serious. The operational implications of Ukraine's graphite campaign extend well beyond the power grid. Think about Russia's air defense systems in occupied Donetsk. Ukraine has been systematically targeting those systems for almost a year. According to the Kyiv Independent, between June of 2025 and March of 2026, Ukraine carried out 492 strikes specifically against Russian air defense infrastructure in occupied territory. Hundreds more targeted the anti-access and area denial systems Russia has deployed across Donetsk. Russia has been losing air defenses at a rate it cannot easily replace. And now, Ukraine is adding a new tool to that campaign. Graphite bombs do not need to destroy an air defense system to neutralize it. They only need to trip its power supply offline. A radar that cannot see is blind. A launcher that cannot receive targeting data cannot fire. An air defense network that goes dark, even temporarily, creates windows, aerial corridors, moments when Ukraine's drones and missiles can transit areas they would normally be unable to penetrate without enormous losses. Ukraine uses the graphite to blind the air defense. Then, while Russia scrambles to bring systems back online, Ukraine sends in the follow-up strike, conventional explosive drones targeting the now vulnerable hardware. By the time Russia's radar comes back, there is a crater where its launcher used to be. This is the layered attack concept that military analysts call suppression of enemy air defenses, or SEAD. Ukraine is doing it with graphite and mid-range drones instead of specialized aircraft and anti-radiation missiles. The economics are extraordinary. A graphite drone costs a fraction of what Russia spends to intercept it, or fails to intercept it. Each time Russia's air defense fires a missile to bring down a Ukrainian graphite drone, it is spending thousands of dollars to intercept a weapon whose payload still lands on the target. The cost-exchange ratio is catastrophic for Russia. Ukraine is fighting the economics of exhaustion, and it is winning that battle. And it goes deeper still. Far behind the front lines, Russia has established command and control centers across occupied Donetsk. These facilities are the brain of Russia's military operations in the region. They are where Russia's commanders receive battlefield intelligence, analyze it, plan their responses, and issue orders to the units at the front. They are loaded with communications equipment, surveillance monitors, encrypted radio systems, satellite uplinks, and the computing infrastructure needed to coordinate an army fighting across hundreds of kilometers of contested territory. All of it runs on electricity. All of it is vulnerable to graphite. Russia's command and control has already been assessed as deeply flawed. Those 35,000 decks in a single month are as much an indictment of Russian tactical leadership as they are evidence of Ukrainian defensive skill. But even flawed command and control is better than none. Ukraine cutting power to a Russian C2 center does not just cause inconvenience. It severs the connection between commanders and troops. Orders stop flowing. Units at the front lose coordination. Soldiers operating in the gray zones, the contestant spaces between the lines, become isolated, unable to receive new instructions or call for support. Pen and paper replace encrypted digital communications. Human runners replace radio networks. Everything slows down, and in the moments when Russia's military is stumbling blind through its own bureaucracy, Ukraine strikes. Here is what that actually costs Russia. A modern military command and control network can process hundreds of data streams simultaneously: drone feeds, artillery coordinates, supply requests, casualty reports, reinforcement orders. When that network goes dark, all of those streams go silent at once. Russia's frontline commanders are left making decisions on information that is hours old. The information does not, and Ukraine exploits every gap. Now picture what comes next. Defense Express believes Ukraine is deploying its graphite warheads primarily on the FP-1 and FP-2 drone platforms, medium-range systems optimized for strikes across occupied territory. But Ukraine also operates longer-range platforms, most notably the FP-5, known as the Flamingo. The Flamingo has a range of approximately 3,000 kilometers, about 1,860 miles. That range puts almost every strategic target inside Russia within reach. Power stations in the Russian interior, industrial facilities, grid nodes serving major cities, and critically, the power infrastructure of Moscow and St. Petersburg, Russia's two largest cities, home to the oligarchs and political elites whose tolerance of this war is not unlimited. Imagine graphite falling on Moscow. Not bombs, not fire. No spectacular explosions that Russian state television can use to frame Ukraine as a terrorist. Just power outages, unexplained blackouts, lights going out across the Russian capital as microscopic filaments drift down from the sky. No permanent damage, no way to explain it, no way to stop it. Russia's elite, accustomed to comfort, to certainty, to a war they believe is happening somewhere far away to someone else, suddenly living with the same uncertainty that Donetsk lives with every night. Ukraine has the graphite to sustain this. It is one of the world's largest graphite producers. Even with Russia's invasion forcing temporary shutdowns of Ukraine's main mine, Ukraine ranked as the fourth largest graphite producer globally between 2022 and 2024. The country holds an estimated 17.9 million tons in reserves. Not all of it is accessible. Some of the richest deposits are in occupied territory. But there is enough, far more than enough, to sustain a graphite campaign at operational scale across multiple fronts for years if necessary. What Russia is seeing in Donetsk right now may be a test, a calibration. Ukraine refining the delivery mechanism, assessing the effect, mapping the vulnerabilities in Russia's grid. If the test succeeds, and early evidence suggests it already has, what comes next could be something far larger. A sustained campaign, an expanding target list, graphite over the occupied territories, then over Russian border regions, then deeper inside Russia itself. Not to destroy, to remind, to demonstrate that there is no safe space, no secure rear, no quiet corner of Russia where the consequences of this war cannot reach. Russia built its strategy around the assumption that Ukraine would eventually break, that attrition would work, that the economics of exhaustion would grind Ukraine into submission before Russia ran out of soldiers. Russia planned for a world in which Ukraine was a victim, desperate, isolated, technologically outmatched, dependent on reluctant Western partners for every capability it could not produce itself. Russia believed that cutting Ukraine off from Western support would leave it helpless. Russia believed that a country fighting for survival would have no capacity to innovate, to develop new weapons, to think strategically about the day after the war. Every one of those assumptions is now broken. Ukraine is not just surviving, it is exporting, innovating, fighting with one eye on the reconstruction that comes after victory. It is using a mineral it has in abundance to neutralize a military machine that costs orders of magnitude more to build and maintain. It is fighting smart in a way that Russia, for all its mass and firepower, has proven incapable of matching. And it is doing it quietly. No press conferences, no announcements, no demands for recognition. Just graphite, falling silently from the sky, and the lights going out in Russia's occupied strongholds. Putin built his trap for a version of Ukraine that no longer exists. If you found value in this, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next.